For 42 years, he fixed cars in a garage 3 miles from Fort Campbell. Sergeants, lieutenants, colonels, they all brought him their trucks and sedans, their classic Mustangs and broken-down Hondas. He charged fair prices, never talked much, always delivered on time. They called him Old Man Rivera and paid cash and drove away satisfied. Until the day a retired general brought in a 1968 Chevy Impala that hadn't run in 30 years, and the mechanic looked at the VIN plate and went absolutely still. He wiped his hands on his rag, walked to the front of the car and traced his fingers over a dent in the hood. Then he looked at the general and said 5 words that made the old officer's knees buckle. "Sir, this was my truck." The garage sat on a county road between Fort Campbell and town. Single bay, corrugated metal roof, hand-painted sign that read, "Rivera's Auto Repair. Honest work. Fair prices." The kind of place soldiers went when they couldn't afford dealership rates and needed someone who understood that a private's paycheck didn't stretch far. Miguel Rivera wiped grease from his hands and studied the transmission pan he'd just dropped from a 2015 F-150, 71 years old. But his hands were still steady. His back complained more than it used to, and his knees had their own opinions about cold mornings. But he could still diagnose an engine problem by sound alone and fix damn near anything with 4 wheels. He'd been doing this for 42 years. Since 1983, when he'd mustered out of the Army with an honorable discharge, a Purple Heart he never talked about, and skills that translated better to civilian auto repair than anything else he knew how to do. The garage was small but organized. Tools hung on pegboard walls in perfect order, a habit from military service that never left. The floor was swept daily. The oil disposal was handled properly. The paperwork was meticulous. Everything the Army had taught him about maintenance and discipline he'd carried into the civilian life. His customers were mostly soldiers. Fort Campbell was home to the 101st Airborne Division, the Screaming Eagles. Young men and women who deployed to every hellhole on earth and came back needing cheap, reliable car repairs from someone who understood military life without asking too many questions. Rivera didn't talk much. Didn't need to. He listened to engines, not stories. He fixed problems, took payment, moved to the next job. 42 years of routine. 42 years of anonymity. 42 years of not thinking about 1968. The sound of tires on gravel pulled him from his thoughts. A flatbed tow truck backed into his lot carrying something covered by a gray tarp. The driver hopped out. Young kid, maybe 20, tattoos and a cigarette. "Got a delivery for Rivera," the kid called. "Where you want it?" "What is it?" "Hell if I know. Some old Chevy. Guy paid me $200 to bring it here specifically. Said to ask for Miguel Rivera and nobody else." The kid shrugged. "You Rivera?" "That's me. Then this is yours." "Where you want it?" Rivera gestured to the empty spot next to his garage bay. The kid worked the flatbed controls, lowering the car to the ground with mechanical efficiency. When it touched down, he unhooked the chains, took his paperwork, and drove off without another word. Rivera approached the tarp slowly. Something about this felt wrong. Nobody had called ahead. Nobody had asked if he had space. Someone had just sent him a car. He grabbed the corner of the tarp and pulled. Underneath was a 1968 Chevrolet Impala. 2-door, originally green, though the paint had faded to a mottled gray-green that spoke of decades in storage. The chrome was pitted. The tires were flat and cracked. The windows were yellowed with age. It was a corpse of a car, something that had died long ago and was only now being exhumed. But Rivera's eyes went immediately to the hood, to a specific dent, about 8 inches wide, roughly circular, positioned 18 inches from the left headlight. The metal was deformed inward, creating a bowl-shaped depression that had rusted at the edges. His hand reached out without conscious thought. His fingers traced the dent. Memory flooded back so fast it made him dizzy. Da Nang, 1968. Rockets screaming overhead. Him diving for cover. The secondary explosion that had sent a piece of shrapnel the size of a dinner plate into the hood of his truck. This truck. His truck. "No," he whispered. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Rivera spun around. An older man stood 10 feet away. White hair, civilian clothes, face weathered by age and command. Late 60s, maybe early 70s. He carried himself like military, even in retirement. Straight back, squared shoulders, eyes that assessed and calculated. "Who are you?" Rivera demanded. "Major General Thomas Westbrook." "Retired." The man stepped closer. "And you're Staff Sergeant Miguel Rivera." "Also retired, though you went by Riva back in the day. 1st Battalion, 5th Infantry, 25th Infantry Division. Da Nang, 1967 to 1969. Rivera's heart was hammering. "How do you know that?" "Because I was there." Westbrook gestured at the Impala. "And so was this truck. I was Lieutenant Westbrook back then. Fresh from West Point, 22 years old. Dumb as hell and twice as confident. You were my driver." The world tilted. Rivera gripped the hood of the Impala. His Impala, their Impala, to keep from falling over. "You died," he whispered. "They told me you died." The convoy ambush, March 18th, 1969. They said everyone in the lead vehicle was KIA. They said wrong. Westbrook smiled sadly. Or they lied. Depending on how you want to look at it. If this story of a hidden past and a car that survived a war already has your attention, hit that like button and subscribe. What happens when this humble mechanic reveals why that particular Impala made a 2-star general start crying will remind you that some bonds survive everything, even time, distance, and classified missions that never officially happened. Now, let's go to that small garage where the past was about to roar back to life. Rivera had tried not to remember. For 42 years, he'd pushed the memories down, buried them under work and routine and the daily grind of fixing other people's problems. But now, standing in his garage with the ghost of his past made metal and rust, the memories came anyway. March 18th, 1969. Convoy duty. 6 vehicles heading from Da Nang to a fire base up Highway 1. Standard resupply run. Nothing special. Nothing dangerous. Just another day in country. Rivera had been driving the lead vehicle, this Impala requisitioned by the Army and painted olive drab with a white star on the hood and U.S. Army stenciled on the doors. It wasn't supposed to be an Impala. They were supposed to have M35 cargo trucks, but the trucks were all deployed, and some supply sergeant had gotten creative, requisitioning civilian vehicles and converting them for military use. So Rivera drove a Chevy Impala in a war zone. It was surreal, but everything about Vietnam was surreal. Lieutenant Westbrook rode shotgun. The back seat held Corporal Davis and Private First Class Nguyen, their interpreter. The trunk was full of ammunition and medical supplies. Behind them, 5 more vehicles followed at regulation intervals. The ambush hit at kilometer marker 47. RPGs from both sides of the road. Machine gun fire. Chaos. The first rocket hit 20 feet ahead of them. Rivera swerved. The second rocket hit the road behind them, cutting them off from the rest of the convoy. Then the small arms fire started, AK-47s from the tree line, pouring lead into the kill zone they'd just entered. "Drive! Drive!" Westbrook was screaming. Rivera drove. Floored the accelerator. The Impala's V8 engine roared, and they rocketed forward through the ambush zone. Bullets punched through the doors, the trunk, the roof. Corporal Davis was hit. Nguyen was screaming. The windshield spider-webbed with cracks. Then, the secondary explosion, an RPG hitting an ammunition dump they hadn't known was there. The blast wave lifted the right side of the Impala off the ground. Shrapnel tore through the air. A piece the size of a dinner plate slammed into the hood, creating that distinctive dent. Another piece took out the rear window. Rivera fought the wheel. Got control. Kept driving. Blood was running down his face from a cut he hadn't felt happen. His ears were ringing. But he drove. They made it 3 clicks before the engine started knocking. Whatever the shrapnel had done, it had damaged something critical. The Impala wheezed, sputtered, and died on the side of Highway 1. "Everyone out," Westbrook ordered. "Defensive perimeter." But Corporal Davis was dead. Nguyen was gut-shot and dying. The rest of the convoy was pinned down back at the ambush site, and the Viet Cong were coming. What happened next was a blur. Fighting, grenades, Westbrook calling in air support on a radio that barely worked. Rivera firing his M16 until the barrel was hot enough to burn his hands. Nguyen dying with his head in Rivera's lap, whispering something in Vietnamese that Rivera never understood. Then the helicopter came. Dust-off medevac. They loaded Nguyen's body, because you never left anyone behind, even the dead. They loaded Westbrook, who'd taken shrapnel to the leg. They loaded Rivera, who had more holes in him than he'd realized. The pilot looked at the shot-up Impala. "What about the vehicle?" "Leave it," someone said. "It's done." And that was the last time Rivera saw the car. "Until today. How?" Rivera finally managed. "How did you find it? How is it even here?" Westbrook walked around the Impala, running his hand along the faded paint like he was greeting an old friend. "After I made General, I got curious. Started pulling old records. That convoy ambush when it was never properly documented. The vehicles were listed as destroyed or captured. But I knew this Impala survived. I'd seen it. So I started digging." He pointed at the VIN plate on the doorframe. Found the VIN in old supply records, tracked it through military auction records from 1970. Some civilian bought it as surplus. It changed hands 6 times over the next 30 years. Sat in a barn in Alabama for 20 of those years. The current owner didn't even know what he had. "Just some old Chevy that didn't run." "Why?" Rivera asked. "Why go through all that trouble?" Westbrook met his eyes. "Because you saved my life that day. And Davis died. And Nguyen died. And I've spent 54 years wondering why I survived and they didn't. I needed to find this truck. I needed to bring it back. And I needed to find you. You could have called. Written a letter. I tried. For decades. But you disappeared. Miguel Rivera from San Antonio. Honorable discharge 1983. Then nothing. No phone listings. No social media. No paper trail. You vanished." Rivera smiled bitterly. "That was the point. I didn't want to be found. Why? Because every time I closed my eyes I saw Davis bleeding out in the back seat. I heard Nguyen whispering in Vietnamese. I felt the bullets hitting metal. I needed to be someone else. So I became a mechanic in Tennessee and tried to forget I'd ever been Sergeant Rivera." Westbrook nodded slowly. "Did it work?" "For 42 years, mostly." Rivera looked at the Impala. "Until you brought my past back on a flatbed." "I brought it back because I want you to restore it." Rivera blinked. "What? This truck survived a war. It deserves to run again, and there's only one person who should bring it back to life. The man who drove it through hell." Westbrook pulled out an envelope. "I'll pay for all parts and labor. Whatever it costs. However long it takes. I don't care. I just need you to fix it." "Why?" "Because I'm dying." Westbrook said it simply, matter-of-factly, Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. I've got maybe 6 months. And before I go, I need to do something right. I need to honor Davis and Nguyen. I need to honor you. And I need to see this truck run one more time." Rivera stared at this man, this general who'd spent decades, and God knows how much money tracking down an old car and a forgotten soldier. "There's something else," Westbrook continued. "I've been working with the Army Historical Center. That convoy ambush was classified for years because of what we were carrying. Some of those medical supplies were experimental, classified, but it's been declassified now. And I'm writing the report, the real report, making sure Davis and Nguyen get the recognition they deserved. Making sure you get the recognition you deserved. I don't want recognition." "Too bad. You're getting it anyway." Westbrook's voice softened. "You drove through an ambush with 3 wounded men and a compromised vehicle. You fought off a Viet Cong assault squad with a half-empty magazine. You kept me alive long enough for that helicopter to arrive. You're a hero, Rivera, whether you want to be or not." Rivera looked at the Impala, at the dent in the hood, at the bullet holes in the doors, at this piece of his past that had somehow survived when so many people hadn't. "I'll need to strip it completely," he said finally. "Frame-off restoration. New engine, transmission, electrical, interior, everything. Whatever it takes. It'll take months. Maybe a year. I've got 6 months. Make it work," Rivera nodded slowly. "Then I'll fix your truck, General." "Our truck," Westbrook corrected. "You drove it. I just sat in it and gave orders. This was always more yours than mine." The restoration became Rivera's obsession. He worked 16-hour days, sourced parts from across the country, fabricated components that no longer existed, learned skills he'd never needed in 42 years of auto repair. General Westbrook visited twice a week, as healthy as the cancer would allow, which was less and less as weeks turned to months. He sat in a folding chair and watched Rivera work. Sometimes they talked about the war. Sometimes they talked about nothing. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence while the sound of impact wrenches and welding torches filled the garage. Other veterans started showing up. Word spread through Fort Campbell. Old Man Rivera was restoring a Vietnam-era vehicle for a dying general. Soldiers came to watch, to help, to hear stories, to connect with a past that felt both distant and immediate. Young privates from the 101st learned how to rebuild a carburetor from a man who'd driven through an ambush. Sergeants who'd deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan found common ground with a man who'd fought in Vietnam. The garage became a meeting place, a memorial, a living history lesson. Rivera taught them everything. How to read an engine, how to feel when something was right, how to fix broken things with patience and precision and care. But he also taught them other things. About Davis, who'd been 19 when he died. About Nguyen, who'd fought for his country and died far from home. About the cost of service that didn't show up in history books. In the 5th month, Westbrook stopped visiting. The cancer had progressed. He was in hospice now, too weak to leave bed. Rivera called him every night. Updates on the restoration. Small talk, memories, goodbyes that neither of them acknowledged as goodbyes. "The engine is in," Rivera told him one night. Original spec 327 V8, rebuilt from the block up. Fired on the first try. "You always were the best mechanic I knew," Westbrook said, his voice thin. "Promise me something. Anything. When it's done, drive it to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Put Davis's name and Nguyen's name on the wall. Let them see their truck one more time. I promise. And Rivera, thank you for everything, for saving my life, for giving me 54 more years, for finishing this with me." "It wasn't finished, sir. I still owe you." You don't owe me anything. You never did. I owed you. And now, maybe, we're even. General Thomas Westbrook died 3 days later. Rivera got the call at 6 a.m. He hung up the phone, walked to the garage, and stood in front of the Impala for a long time. Then he got to work, because he'd made a promise, and some promises were more important than grief. 3 weeks later, Rivera drove the restored 1968 Chevy Impala into Washington, D.C. The car gleamed. Cherry red paint, original color. Chrome polished to a mirror shine. White wall tires. Leather interior. It looked exactly as it had in 1967, before the Army had painted it olive drab, before the war had tried to destroy it. But Rivera had kept certain things. The dent in the hood, the bullet holes in the doors, now welded and filled, but still visible if you knew where to look. History couldn't be erased. It could only be honored. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial stretched before him, black granite reflecting the sky, names carved into stone, 58,000 Americans who never came home. Rivera walked along the wall until he found them. Corporal James T. Davis Pennell, 20W. Line 47 PFC Nguyen Van Theo Pennell, 29W. Line 48, he placed his hand on their names, felt the carved letters under his fingers. 54 years later, and he could still remember their faces. Davis's laugh, Nguyen's careful English, the way they'd died while he'd lived. I brought the truck, he said quietly. General said you should see it. It's beautiful. You'd be proud. A crowd had gathered. Other veterans, families, tourists who'd seen the cherry red Impala with the white star on the hood and the bullet holes in the doors. Someone had taken a photo. Someone else was crying. A young soldier approached. Army uniform, 101st Airborne patch on his shoulder. Sir, is that really the truck from the convoy ambush? From the historical report? Rivera nodded. It is. General Westbrook's report? The one that just got released? That's the one. The soldier extended his hand. It's an honor, Sergeant Rivera. My name is Davis, Corporal Timothy Davis. James Davis was my grandfather. Rivera's breath caught. He looked at this young man. Early 20s, determined eyes, wearing the uniform his grandfather had died in. He was a good soldier, Rivera said. He was my friend, I know. I read the report. You tried to save him. I did save him. Just not in the way that mattered. No, sir. You did save him. The young corporal gestured at the Impala. You remembered him. You honored him. You made sure his story got told. That's saving someone. That's making sure they don't die twice. Rivera stood at the wall for hours. Veterans came and went. Some had known Davis or Nguyen. Others had known General Westbrook. Many had known neither but came anyway, drawn by the story, the car, the connection. As sunset painted the memorial in golden shadow, Rivera got back in the Impala, started the engine, that perfect V8 rumble, and drove home to Tennessee. Rivera's garage looked different now. The hand-painted sign had been replaced with a professional one. Rivera's Auto Repair. Honest work, fair prices, veteran-owned since 1983. The single bay had been expanded to 3. The lot was full of cars, but the most prominent feature was the Impala, parked in a small garage attachment with glass walls. Not for sale, not for rent, just there, visible. A rolling memorial to 2 men who died in a truck 54 years ago, and 1 general who spent his last months making sure they were remembered. Young soldiers from Fort Campbell still came for repairs, but now they also came for stories. Rivera had stopped hiding, started talking, sharing what he'd learned in Vietnam and in 42 years of civilian life afterward. He'd opened a scholarship fund, the Davis and Nguyen Memorial Scholarship, for children of veterans studying automotive technology. He'd started speaking at Fort Campbell about military transition and the importance of honoring the past while building a future. And every Sunday, he took the Impala out, drove it around town, let people see it, let them ask questions, let the story live. On his workbench next to his tools sat a photo. General Westbrook in his dress uniform standing next to the restored Impala 1 month before he died. He was smiling, really smiling, the kind of smile that came from finishing something important. Next to it, a letter, the last one Westbrook had written before he died. Dear Rivera, thank you for driving me through hell. Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for honoring Davis and Nguyen. Thank you for restoring our truck, but, most of all, thank you for teaching me that survival isn't the end of service. It's the beginning of responsibility. We survived so we could remember. We remember so they're never forgotten. The truck is yours. Always was. Drive it well. Your friend, General Thomas Westbrook. Rivera had framed the letter, put it on the wall where everyone could see it, because some stories needed to be told, some promises needed to be kept, and some old mechanics needed to stop hiding and start living. A young private walked into the garage, nervous, new to Fort Campbell, driving a Honda that made a sound like a dying cat. Mr. Rivera, my sergeant said you're the best mechanic in town. Can you help me? Rivera smiled. That's why I'm here, soldier. Let's take a look. As he walked to the Honda, he glanced back at the Impala, at the dent in the hood, at the history preserved in metal and paint, at the promise kept. And he heard Westbrook's voice one last time. We survived so we could remember. Yes, sir, Rivera said quietly. We did.